Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Raw podcast. Phil here, and as ever, I'm joined by my colleagues James Copley and Jason Jones. Been a little while since we've all been able to get together because of the way the schedule's been and life and all of that. So we are inevitably going to chat about the Everton game as we go along, but we thought this was a good opportunity with Sunderland finally having a few days without a game to pause and zoom out a bit. So we're going to chat and mainly about the January window, and then just reflect on what's been a really hectic period for Sunderland. So, first of all, how are we, boys? Good Christmas?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, nice to be back. A bit of normality, routine. All goes out the window during Christmas, doesn't it?
Yeah, nice to get back to a bit of mundanity, to be honest, because it has been chaotic. Feels like there's been a game every 2 or 3 days. So
it's the first time in a long time I've woken up on a Monday morning and felt very good about the fact that it's just a normal, boring Monday. I think it feels like it's been a good while. Listen, I think we're obviously, coming up to 12 days into the January transfer window now. And so far, it's been a bit of a non-event, to be fair. A couple of outgoings that we were kind of expecting. Nothing particularly exciting happening. I suppose we shouldn't be hugely surprised about this. Sunderland are never big sort of January business doers. We had Enzo last year, but going back further, I can only really think of Geldhart on loan, Romain Mundell, but of course he didn't play for a while. So I just wanted to start. I'll start with you, James, about how you're kind of feeling about this window, because as of yet, there's not a lot to talk about, but that's kind of not really how Sunderland work, is it?
No, it's not, and I think it underlines just how well they did in the summer to get all of these brilliant players who've done exceptionally well. There's no real one glaring area of the squad where you think Sunderland have to strengthen, otherwise the face going down. Obviously, that relates to how well Sunderland have done this season as well. What is it? 30 points after 21 games is absolutely superb. I'm happy to call it. I don't think Sunderland go down from this position, given from what I've seen from the bottom three clubs. So there's no real... It doesn't feel like a sort of Kiefer Moore situation. Do you remember that a couple of years ago with Mick Beale in charge, and we were desperate to get that signing over the line and it didn't happen? There are little areas of the squad you can point towards, maybe a right winger, depending on sort of Bertrand Traore's injury and how Talby comes back. Maybe it's a little bit added firepower as well, but I think that would sort of be like the cherry on top of the cake at the moment. And I think it speaks to how well they've done generally squad building in recent years, but particularly last summer to get, what was it in the end, 11 or 12 players in, and they've all done pretty well, barring really Masuaku, you would say, and potentially Edingra, but he's slowly starting to find a little bit of form, although he can do better. So I don't think it's going to be particularly busy. We've done transfer windows before, haven't we, Phil and Jace, where it's really chaotic and you're being linked with names left, right and centre, particularly last summer, but it doesn't feel like that at all. And I think Sunderland are in a really good position. They're in a good position in the league, and if a good deal does come up and it works financially, then they can absolutely pull the trigger on that sort of deal. But I guess as well, there's no need to really pay over the odds or panic in January. We know prices can be inflated. And I guess Romain Mundell would be a good example that if a deal does become available in a position for 6 months or 12 months' time, then you might see something like that from Sunderland. But in terms of strengthening the first team now, we look pretty good and we're in a good position. So I'm not expecting a really frantic end to the January window, to be honest.
James makes a good point there that even in January transfer windows where it's been abundantly clear that Sunderland should do something, they haven't necessarily done it. So I guess we shouldn't be particularly shocked that in a window where they are in an exceptionally strong position, they haven't done much. How chill are you feeling about it at the moment?
A lot chiller than I would have expected to at the start of the season. I think it's fair to say. Like the thing, and James has sort of hit upon it already, but Sunderland have, they've bought themselves this luxury of not having to panic this window. They've got the bones of a really good squad in place. They've more importantly got the points on the board that would lead you to believe that they're going to be all right this season. And you just have to look at the alternatives. West Ham scrapping for their lives down there have already gone and spent £50 million on two strikers who may or may not fire them to survival. Sunderland are not in that position. If they decide to go and bring in a player or two, for the right price in the right area of the pitch, that's very much their choice. They're not being forced by circumstance into doing that. So for that reason, again, to echo everything that Copley said, like, I think that maybe there'll be one or two, but only if it suits the club, only if it feels right. You know, there's certainly not that urgency there. And like I said, if you told me that at the start of the season that Sunderland would be in this position heading into the January window, then, you know, I don't know if I would have believed you, but I certainly would have bit your hand off for it, you know.
I think we were obviously at Everton at the weekend, and one thing I did think, James, is, and I don't say this to dig the lads out, but we talk a lot about value, and especially in January, the difficulty of getting value. And I think especially in the forward areas, you look at Beto and you look at Barry. I mean, I think that's about 55, 60 million pounds worth of striker. And I actually think Barry's got a lot of talent, by the way. I think you can see the attributes are there. So I think he could be a good sign in time. But I did reflect on the fact that, you know, I think everyone would like Sunderland to invest in the forward areas and keep bringing in quality. I think that's kind of obvious and does need to happen in time. But I did reflect a little bit during that game that, gosh, it does make you realise how difficult it is to find value in these positions.
And you can go further than that, Phil. Obviously, we had the conversation at Everton about Beto and how poor he was. But you look at some of the big money forwards that have gone to top level, in quotation mark, clubs like Manchester United, Benjamin Sesko. He hasn't hit the ground running, has he? He cost an absolute small fortune. Victor Gyökeres hasn't really become prolific. I think he's doing a decent job for Arsenal. I think we'll probably win the league, so you could judge it as a success. But it just goes to show that it's really, really, really hard for strikers and forwards. It's really hard to get a good one. And sometimes, as you mentioned, Phil and allude to, you can pay a great deal of money for one and they don't score. And ultimately, unfortunately for strikers, that's the one thing they're sort of judged on, isn't it, really? We saw with like Josh Madger, and everyone used to say, oh, well, all he does is score. And it's like, well, yeah, that's pretty good for a forward. So they do tend to do that. But I'm fairly comfortable with Sunderland's three options, to be honest. Wilson Isidore coming back in. I'd like to see him get a goal soon, just so he can rediscover that early season form. But he's a player I really like. Broby offers you something entirely different. And I rate Eliza Mayenda so highly. He got that assist against Everton, and I think he can contribute towards the back end of the season. So with the wingers that Sunderland have to come back, and particularly Talby, who I rate exceptionally highly and think that he could be a real top quality operator in 2 or 3 years, I'm quite relaxed about
it. Jace, in terms of James mentioned briefly there about positions, and I'd be inclined to agree with him that I think if you gave me one position, I'd probably strengthen on the right, just because I like how that then maybe frees Talby up to play on the left, I think. So that would be one position I'd be looking at. I'm kind of inclined to agree with a striker. I think if you can get a brilliant striker, then happy days. I actually think Sunderland's three strikers, I think there's a nice blend there. And we know that Sunderland would ideally maybe like to sign a kind of more defensive midfielder. I assume that's kind of linked to the Neil situation. But in terms of the positions, what's your kind of feeling with it in terms of where ideally you would like to see Sunderland strengthen if they can?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've kind of named the three there, to be honest, Phil. I think the one that everybody is sort of crying out for is a right winger, really. You know, if you look at, obviously Sunderland have got plenty of options in wide areas, but I think over the first leg of the season, it's become apparent that, you know, 3 of the 4 options they've got, if you don't include Eliza Mayenda in that sort of cohort, 3 of the 4 options prefer playing on the left. And that sort of leaves you with Bertrand Traoré, who, you know, I've said before, wasn't convinced at first. He's won me over. I've been very impressed with him in recent performances, but he's come back from AFCON with a little bit of a knock. It's not entirely clear as to, you know, how much of an issue that could be for Sunderland. And so you're sort of in a position where, you know, you're looking at maybe playing Talby on the right or a Dingra on the right. And I think, like I said, it's become increasingly apparent that neither one of those players, you know, would like to be on the right. They'd much rather be on the left. So I think that's the one that you look at and you go, right, if we can get another right winger in for depth, you know, to rotate, whatever it may be, I think that would be a bit of a no-brainer. I agree with James. I think that, you know, it's felt for a few weeks now, a couple of months, whatever it may be, that the sort of choice has been Robbie or Isidore. Mayenda's almost been a little bit of a forgotten man, hasn't he? He hasn't really played too often. And when he has, he's sort of been brought in on the right, like I mentioned. But I thought he was brilliant against Everton. And I thought that we saw a lot of the sort of best attributes in his game and what he can offer this Sunderland side. Because, you know, as good as Robbie's hold-up players, as brilliant as Isidore is, as sort of running in behind on occasion, there's nobody who can get the ball and drive the team forward in the way that Mayenda does. You know, he brings something so unique at the point of attack in that sense. So, you know, if he is somebody who Le Bris is sort of comfortable relying on, as he did last season so often, then I do think it sort of negates the need to bring in a striker a little bit. And then, like you say, obviously the centre of midfield, a lot of it's going to hinge on the Dan Neil situation, because for me, going into that Everton game, if he's not getting minutes there, then surely there have got to be questions asked about whether or not he does have a long-term future at the club. And then if he is to depart, does that then leave Sunderland maybe a body short in the engine room? And if that is the case, then you would have to hope that they do bring somebody in. But aside from that, I mean, the defence looks good. And obviously there are plenty of options in defence, plenty of versatility in defence, which I think has been key. And then aside from that, I think Sunderland are looking pretty okay, truth be told.
Yeah, and this is something I wanted to dig into, and I'll get both of your thoughts on this, but I'll come to you first, James, is that obviously we all kind of looked quite ominously, I think, at this kind of AFCON festive period in terms of how Sunderland were going to cope. But I do wonder to what extent this will inform how relaxed Sunderland are about January, because if we go through the positions where we were asking questions, I think Mienda's had a good few weeks. I think Dennis Cirkin has had an excellent few weeks, and that would have been one of the question marks coming into the window. I don't think it's his best position, but I think Hatroja has shown that he is more than capable of playing in midfield if required. I just feel like Adingra, I think, not quite so much, but there have been flashes. But I just feel like there were a lot of positions where we've been saying for a while, you know, it'd be interesting to see how people do in AFCON. And the one I forgot to mention there is Luke, who I thought you could make a strong case for, or certainly over the 120 minutes, being man of the match at Everton. So, I mean, has what's happened over the last few weeks, A, made you more relaxed about this January transfer window, and B, do you think it's probably made Sunderland a bit more relaxed in terms of we know they're going to keep investing, but maybe they feel like they can do it by and large in the summer when it's a bit easier?
I think so, yeah. We all expected Sunderland to perhaps struggle a little bit more during the AFCON period. I think the wider public thought that as well, but we ended up picking up some very handy results. Obviously, a draw away to Tottenham, decent results. You know, there was that run of draws in there as well. So we're ticking along nicely. And I think the other one you forgot to mention there, Phil, coming back in, will be Habib Diarra. And he only played what, 2 or 3 times for us before getting injured. He's hopefully back up to speed now because he's been playing in AFCON with Senegal. So there's that to throw in. I think Sunderland's injury record this season has actually been fairly decent. So although the squad was stretched during AFCON, we haven't seen anybody go down too seriously. You know, Reinildo due to come back in as well when he recovers from whatever little niggle he's had. So I think the squad's looking in good shape, and I think Le Bris will now. He talks about connection and trust, but after that AFCON period, I think he will have a lot of trust in the players that remained and did the job for him. I guess the only worry would be is that, like, if a Xhaka or a Siddiqui did go down sort of long term, how does that Sunderland midfield look? I agree on Sergen. I think he's showed himself to be an able deputy to Reinildo when he comes back in, and I think when you look at Sergen, his trajectory, his career at Sunderland, he's still only 23. I know he's had injury issues, but to buy a player of Dennis Sergen's caliber, you'd probably be looking to spend money. Sunderland have the player already in the building. Presumably, he'd like to stay. That just makes sense to me, to maybe give him another couple of years. I'd really like to see that go through. I think he can actually develop and get better. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being an understudy to Reinildo for maybe a season or a season and a half, and maybe fight that position out with him. So that's something I'd really like to see Sunderland get done. But of course, there are other factors, aren't there, whether Dennis Cirkin would like to play regularly. We know Sunderland won't stand in the way of players that do. So this has all been aided and abetted, really, this feeling of relaxation by just how good Sunderland have been this Premier League season and how well they've ticked over. It's been lovely to see, and it is nice to have a January window where there isn't much pressure, as previously mentioned. And yeah, Sunderland keep bucking the trend, don't they? As I say, we all thought they'd struggle during AFCON. We all thought they'd struggle generally in the Premier League. We all thought they hadn't played anybody. Sunderland have had all these things levelled at them, and they keep coming through them. So they'll probably come through the next one with flying colours as well.
I mean, I think the second one, it does feel like there's been quite a big shift, doesn't it, over the last few weeks, Jace? Because I think, coming into AFCON, obviously Cirkin had been injured for so long. It felt like there was a little bit of doubt around that one, and obviously we have no idea what's going to happen with the contract situation. But it does feel like you're starting to look at that and think, well, why go in and spend money on a left back when you've got Reynaldo, who obviously is exceptional, and you've got a 23-year-old here who has shown a bit of promise at this level and who you kind of know and trust. I mean, if you can get that contract situation resolved, I mean, that feels like the best kind of solution for everyone and potentially save you a small fortune to spend in other areas as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolute no-brainer, isn't it? But like you said, it's that if, isn't it? You know, it ultimately comes down to what Dennis Cirkin wants to do. I'd like to see him stay for all of the reasons that have already been mentioned. This was like such a litmus test for him these past few weeks, and I do think that he's shown himself to be an incredibly adequate and adept option for Sunderland. You know, obviously he's not going to play most weeks because Reynaldo's come in and has been absolutely magnificent, arguably one of the best left backs we've seen ever at Sunderland. I do genuinely think he's been that good already. And then, you know, Cirkin's in a position where he then has to decide, doesn't he? You know, does he want to be warming the bench and sort of trying to eke his way into that starting 11, or does he want to go somewhere and be the main man? You'd like to think that because of the way that Sunderland set themselves up and because of the communication they have with the players, that there is, you know, a sort of very clear succession plan lined out there. You know what I'm trying to say, don't you? Lined up for him. But again, you can't legislate for what the player wants to do. You know, I think that you're absolutely right, though. You know, if Sunderland can keep him, if they don't have to go and sign a covering option in that position, obviously lots of talk about Arthur Masuaku going as well. So if he does go, that leaves you with two, doesn't it? So if Sunderland can put themselves in a position where they can get Cirkin tied down to a long-term deal, they can put that to bed, they can ultimately, you know, focus on other positions. I think that would be a best-case scenario. Because like I say, Cirkin over these past few weeks, he's been, for the most part, he hasn't struggled at all with a step up, has he? And I think that's probably the best thing you can say about it.
I did want to reflect before we look at outgoings, James, on Meander, because I do think we always talk about strikers, and it is one of those, you always want your club to sign a 30-goal striker or another 30-goal striker, but I do really want to see Meander play more because I thought he looked so bright on Saturday, and I'm almost making a mental note that, you know, not to be patient if it takes him a little while to get going, but I would really like over the course of this next 18 games for him to get a lot more football, because I just think the answer sometimes is right in front of you, and maybe not yet, but I do just think he's got so much going in his favour. You know, and if someone's view is we're not going to sign another striker because Broby's coming along well and we want to give Meander more minutes, like, personally, I'm comfortable with that. Determined not to sort of throw my toys out the pram if we lose a couple of games where we don't score, if that makes sense.
I think with Meander as well, he's 20 years old and he's already this good and he's already produced moments for Sunderland. He's a big game player. I loved watching him last season. I think he's got a long way to run in his development, and I think that's hugely, hugely exciting. And you're right, sometimes the solution's right in front of you, and you don't want to see a player like Meander, you don't want to see his development stunted, because to buy a player of Meander's calibre, say if a Premier League club came in for Meander last summer, you're probably looking at like, what, I don't know, 15, 20 million, maybe even a bit more add-ons, stuff like that. So you've got this excellent footballer in the door who has this connection with the crowd anyway, who likes working for Le Bris. Le Bris sort of handed him his Sunderland career on a plate, didn't he, at the start of that pre-season, bringing Meander in from the cold after a failed loan spell at Hibernian. So I'm comfortable with him playing. He's versatile. He can play up front in the two. He can play by himself. He's got pace to burn, which I think is hugely important in the Premier League. He's got a good understanding with Isidore if those two were ever to play together. I like him on the right-hand side as well. I think he offers something different. He can get in behind. And I think if he does play on the right-hand side a little bit more often, I do actually think his defensive work is coming on. I absolutely love him, and I've got no issue with him playing more. And I'm a tad surprised he spent sort of so long out of the picture, but we did have that very good sort of system with Broby or Isidore starting, and then whoever was left out coming on for the last half an hour. But I think with Sunderland's three strikers at the moment, they do all offer something different, and that's very good. But the one thing that neither three offer at the moment in the Premier League is that not one is prolific. So I guess the challenge is to those guys is go and make yourself prolific. And I'm excited by them. I like them. I think they've all got personality. I think they all bring something to the table, and I think I can see them scoring goals in a Sunderland shirt as well. You've got to remember as well, like, a coaching attacking patterns is the hardest part of the game. It's the hardest thing to get right on a football pitch. You know, you could argue that that's the area of Sunderland's game that needs improving. The criticism at Everton would be that Sunderland didn't finish the game off. And then obviously the daft penalty decision allows Everton back into it. So if they can get that right, then suddenly you're looking at a very, very good Premier League side. And I think that is exciting.
Yeah, I think we all seem to be in agreement that Sunderland definitely need to strengthen, certainly out wide as they go. But that, you know, if this isn't the window, this isn't the window. Let's have a little chat about outgoings. I mean, we know there's sort of that group of players who are likely to leave this month, and we don't need to dwell too much on that in terms of Bar, Pembele and Matete. Obviously, have already gone. Pembele on loan, but there's a few big talking points, and we'll start with Dan Neil. I mean, it's impossible at this stage not to think, Jace, that the contract situation has played a massive part in this, in terms of, you know, the lack of opportunities that he's had. And I know Cirin kind of runs contrary to that, in terms of the opportunities he's had. Of course, he's in the same boat with his contract, but whether Sunderland feel they've got a better chance of a resolution there, I'm not sure. But Saturday just felt like the point at which, you know, you're thinking there's no way back here. It's a matter of kind of when, not if. Did you kind of feel the same with Dan's Sunderland career?
Yeah, I do, unfortunately. I mean, first of all, I wasn't necessarily expecting Sunderland to go as strong with the starting 11 as they did on Saturday. And so I was sort of coming into the weekend thinking this is maybe an opportunity for a Dan Neil or someone of that ilk to come in and, you know, prove themselves and sort of make a statement. Obviously, it didn't work out like that. Sadiqi's come back from AFCON. Xhaka's obviously kept his place on the side, and suddenly Dan Neil's on the bench again. And I think the difference for me between the Neil and the Cirin situation is that Sunderland's hand was almost forced a little bit with Cirin, wasn't it? You know, Reinildo goes away, Masuaku as well, and suddenly you're in a position where I know Trey Humes played left back a lot this season, but you know, it was more natural at times, wasn't it, to bring Cirin inside, and so he naturally gets that opportunity to prove himself. With Dan Neil, as soon as it became apparent that he wasn't going to be the Sadiqi replacement, then you start to question, well, where is that opportunity going to come for him? And I think that at this stage of the campaign, if he hasn't been given any sort of prolonged opportunity to show what he can do at this level, then you really have got to be questioning whether he has got a future at Sunderland. And it's almost... It would have almost been unimaginable saying that. You know, you think Wembley and the role that he played last season, captaining the side through the playoffs, everything that he did and how wonderful he was doing that. You know, to then be in this position, 6-7 months later, it feels a little bit incongruous. But at the same time, if you look at the level of Sunderland's recruitment, you know, Granit Xhaka's arguably been the best signing that any Premier League club has made. Noah Sadiqi looks like the second coming of N'Golo Kante. He's an unbelievable unearthed gem that they've got. And so for that reason, you know, maybe it is understandable that Neil hasn't had the minutes. But then from his point of view, you're looking at it and you're going, well, he's only human. He can't be satisfied with this situation on some level, even if he'd never admit it, even if he'd never come out and publicly say it. He must be wanting to play football, you know. And obviously in an ideal world, that would have been at Sunderland, his boyhood club, the club that he captained to promotion. But if he needs to go somewhere else to do that, then maybe it will become the best solution for all parties. Because at this point, it's a real shame to see him on the bench every week, especially because we know the talent he's got. We know what he could contribute to a side. And so for that reason, I think that, you know, it's starting to feel like an inevitability, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one to discuss, James, in the sense that nobody knows how Dan would have fared. Everyone will have their opinions on whether he is a Premier League player or not. Actually, nobody can say because we just haven't seen it. But it's a tricky one where I think it's almost impossible to criticise Le Bris because, you know, Xhaka and Sadiqi, as Jay said, their performances have spoken for themselves. And ultimately, I think Le Bris's decision to go with Hertroide when Sadiqi was away has largely been vindicated. So I don't think you can lay criticism on his door. But I think when you see the opportunities at times that 09's had, that Cirin's had, that obviously Humes had, I don't think this can purely be an ability thing. It feels to me that, you know, that for whatever reason, the inability to reach an agreement on this contract while Sunderland are in the Championship, whatever happened around that just must have lingered for me, because while I can understand him not starting every week, it just doesn't, it feels slightly incongruous that he's had so little football of late. Yeah,
it does feel like there must be something going on. I would add to that as well that sort of Dan Neil's been the poster boy for the academy, really, alongside Chris Rigg and Anthony Patterson these past couple of years. Again, a little bit like Mayender and Sirkin, to buy a player of Dan Neil's quality for a Premier League side if he had 2 or 3 years left on his contract from the Championship. Say, for instance, a Hayden Hackney. Again, 10, 15, 20 million, we've developed this player. So to see it sort of peter out like this is sad. I'm very loyal to this group of players that have been double promotion winners with us, in the likes of Ballard, who came in after promotion and helped Sunderland get back to the Premier League. He's achieved so much at this club, and I think part of his story as well is that he stayed with the club at its lowest ebb. You know, when players were departing left, right and centre under Stuart Donald and Charlie Methven, there was a mass exodus from the Academy of Light. And Dan Neil and Anthony Patterson stayed, and I don't think that gets talked about enough. Again, as you say, I will agree, although I would have liked to have seen Dan Neil get a chance for Sunderland in the Premier League. You just simply can't argue with the rationale, because Granit Xhaka, Noah Siddiqui, Gertrude when he's come in, you know, Habib Diarra is a £30 million player, Enzo Lefebvre as well. You know, where's he playing within that? Is he good enough to start in the Premier League at the moment with those players in the form they're shown? Absolutely not. And it's weird because he's almost become a casualty of Sunderland taking the Premier League so seriously this season, because we've sort of skipped, for this season anyway, that lower mid-table battle, haven't we? And if we had been involved in that and we hadn't maybe signed a Xhaka or a Siddiqui, or had gone as far as we had done with recruitment in the summer, then perhaps Dan Neil would have played. But the club's almost been supercharged, hasn't it, in the summer, and it's gone further than we expected. And unfortunately, Dan Neil's been a casualty of that. It's sad to see. I like him. I like him as a person. I like him as a player. I always have done. I think we've waxed lyrical about Dan Neil on this podcast quite a lot over the years, Phil and Jace. You know, him dropping into the sixth in the Championship, I thought he did a really good job. Yeah, I've seen how much it means to him. I was pitch side after the Coventry City semi-final second leg, and he was just like the rest of us, like a fan, blown away by what had happened. Couldn't believe it. To see him celebrate with his dad and to watch him share that moment, the first time he'd seen his dad since Sunderland had got to Wembley, and they shared an embrace, and all of those moments, it meant so much to him. But I think he needs to play. He deserves to play somewhere. I think he can go somewhere like a Rangers or somewhere else, and I think he can get his career back on track. He's hugely talented, and I could see him doing the business for another team somewhere else, and eventually getting back to the Premier League and becoming a regular. I do think he's that good. It's just a shame that Sunderland have outgrown him possibly too fast, and obviously with that contract situation, there's clearly something going on, isn't there? I do wonder, Phil, actually, whether that playoff final actually sticks in the mind of Le Bris, because Dan Neil was the captain, but he didn't have his best game. He had a little bit of cramp, didn't he? And he ended up getting taken off. Was it around the 65th minute? Sunderland managed to turn the game, and I just feel like ever since then he hasn't really been fancied, has he?
My feeling is that probably Sunderland maybe haven't felt the incentive to give him opportunities to almost learn and make mistakes at Premier League level in a way that maybe they're more inclined to with Hume, with Rigg, with Mayender. That's my feeling on it. I think Le Bris just picks his strongest team, and that obviously Xhaka and Siddiqui and then Gertrude have been in that. But I think where you've seen them in the last few weeks find opportunities for Rigg, find opportunities for Mayender, and sometimes it hasn't worked. It feels like maybe, I don't know what you think about this, Jace, but I feel like I get the feeling that maybe Sunderland haven't felt like they've wanted to do that with Dan, presumably because he's heading into the last 6 months of his contract. That's just my kind of gut feeling on it.
Yeah, I mean, there's very probably some credence to that, you know. The overwhelming emotion is it is just a shame, isn't it? You know, because there's no way that he wouldn't have wanted to try and prove himself, you know. And I think that, again, you can't speak for Dan Neil. None of us know Dan Neil. None of us know what Dan Neil's feeling. But you can't tell me that in an ideal world, he wouldn't have come up with Sunderland, been playing at least semi-regularly in the Premier League and signed that new deal. You know, and so the two kind of go hand in hand, don't they? You know, he's not playing. So then, you know, is there a hesitancy to give him the contract? If they're hesitating over the contract, are they then more sort of willing to not play him so much? And it goes around in circles, doesn't it? You know, and so I don't know. I agree with James. I just think that right now, what's best for the player And I think that given what he's contributed to Sunderland, his well-being and his opportunities absolutely deserve to be at the forefront of the conversation. What's best for the player is surely him going out and getting minutes. I think, obviously, if he was on a longer-term contract, then you'd be having the conversation about whether or not a loan deal would be the best option. But because it's running down and it's running down quickly, you have almost reached this precipice, haven't you? And it's kind of like you sign the deal or you cut your ties. And unfortunately, I just don't see a solution to this right now that doesn't end with Dan Neil leaving the club, and that's unfortunately the harsh reality of it.
I think as well in the summer, Phil, the noise towards the back end of the transfer window was that Dan Neil was going to stay and fight for his place, and reports emerged left, right, and centre. That to me actually says that they were probably happy to let him go in the summer had a bid come in with 12 months left on his contract.
Yeah, well, they would have done for PSR reasons, wouldn't they, realistically? And that's another big part of this story, really, is that obviously it now looks increasingly like he'll depart on a free, and that will have been a factor in the whole thing. I think there'll be a lot more to say on that one as and when it happens. I know Rangers are interested, but they have just spent a good few million on a midfielder, so be interesting to see how that develops over the next few days and weeks. I think there's not really too many big outgoing talking points to discuss now, because Luke in 09 told you, James, at the weekend that he's going absolutely nowhere, and I think his performance kind of backed up his place. Romain Mundle, maybe if Sunderland sign a winger, there'll be a conversation to be had about that, but I certainly don't think there is at the moment. So the last one I'm just going to chuck to you both is Chris Rigg, because a lot of people have been asking me over the last couple of weeks whether they think he should go out on loan. And my view is, to be honest, is just train with this level of players and get the Premier League minutes when they come round. And for me, there's absolutely no need to rush or panic on that one. Just let the guy train with these top class players. Jace, I'll start with you. What's your kind of feeling on that?
Yeah, I agree, mate. He's got all the time in the world, doesn't he? Again, we've spoke about this before, but it can sometimes be easy to forget how young this Sunderland group is, because we've seen them play so much in recent years that you almost trick yourself into thinking they're further along in the development than they are, especially because they've achieved so much as well. But I think in the case of Rigg in particular, he's positively embryonic in footballing terms. Do you know what I mean? Like, he has all the time in the world to become, a top player, because he's obviously got the natural ability, and I think the fact that even at this stage of his career, Le Bris is willing to, throw him into to difficult situations, to put him into, the sort of cauldron of Premier League matches and trust him in those situations. I think that speaks volumes as to how highly he is regarded. I think that you're absolutely right. There's almost this tendency, isn't there, to think that every player, the best solution is to give them minutes and to get them out and play senior football and play regularly and all this sort of stuff. But actually, look at Trey Ogunsui. Now, I know there are different levels, at different stages of their career. Ogunsui went to Falkirk, played 9 times. 7 of those were from the bench. You've got to question how much that has actually benefited him. Obviously he's come back, he's gone out on loan to Shrewsbury now, and hopefully he'll get more minutes there. But the question for me is, in terms of his personal development, might he have just been better sticking around the Academy of Light and learning from the likes of Wilson Isidore, Ryan Brobby, whoever it might be, and especially when we're talking about Chris Rigg and the sort of comparable players are, I know he's been playing out wide, but we've seen him play through the middle plenty. And so you're looking at the likes of your Granit Xhakas and your Enzo Lefebvre's, and, certainly in that more creative sense of player like Lefebvre, then, yeah, keep him around, let him learn. And maybe we get to a point in a year or two where you're looking at and he's knocking on the door and he needs those minutes, and you go, okay, we'll reassess and we'll maybe send him out somewhere. But right now, I see there's no urgency on my part to be thinking, right, Chris Rigg needs to be playing football week in, week out. I think he's in a perfectly good position as things are.
Yeah, I mean, the thing for me, James, is he's played 60 championship games. I don't really know what he gains other than match fitness by going out and playing another 10, 15, but what's your kind of feeling on it?
I'm in complete agreement. I think any talk of a loan is far too hasty. He's only 18. I think we have a tendency, don't we, as fans to maybe panic a little bit when a player isn't in the team. And when it's transfer season, you're constantly sort of playing FIFA and Football Manager in your head, who can go, who should go, I just think he needs to stay where he is, stay at the Academy of Light. I mean, he's learning from Granit Xhaka. The only real argument I think you could say, would it be beneficial for him to go and play like a season or a full season again at centre midfield somewhere? I know he's playing on the right-hand side a lot at the moment, but if he wants that to be his long-term position centrally, would that be a benefit at some point? But I just don't think we're there yet. I think it's an interesting one with Rigg because he looked quite physically robust in the Championship, but I think in the Premier League, particularly on the right-hand side, he's looked a little bit physically like he's been sort of found wanting. And I don't mean that as a very harsh criticism, because I think it'll come, and you only need to look at Enzo Lefebvre of somebody who's a similar stature to Rigg in terms of his height and size, who is quite strong in the ball. So I think all that'll come with experience. Again, I'll reiterate the point, he's only 18. It feels like he's been around forever, because I guess he has. He's been in and around Sunderland's first team since he was like 15. But for me, like when Mayenda wasn't playing, the talk was that he needed a loan. I think we keep these players for at least 6 months, if not another year, and then you reassess, because you don't know how well they're going to develop. It might be that Sunderland sort of, again, supercharge the way up the Premier League after another amazing summer. And then you have to look at loans for these players, but I don't think we're anywhere close yet. Phil, just quickly, I was interested to see the Lukemi transfer rumour mill kick back into action. What's your view on that? Because it was sort of kiboshed, wasn't it, in October?
Yeah, that's still sort of what you hear from the club. I mean, I think there's always an element of a question mark when a club likes a player as much as someone clearly like Lukemi. Like, if the price suddenly absolutely drops to, not a lot, then could the situation change? At the moment, it doesn't seem to be on Sunderland's radar. There's been absolutely nothing that I've heard coming into this window that defence was in any way a priority. I think ultimately Sunderland pulled out the Lukemi deal and signed Hetroide, and that's worked out really, really well. So I don't see it happening in this window. I think probably what's happening is you've got a situation where Bologna can now see that Lukemi only has 18 months on his contract and his value's dropping every day, basically. So I'm not surprised that the links are resurfaced. I'm not going to sit here and say absolutely no chance, because as I say, when it's clear that a club likes to play so much, you never know. But at the moment, my sources are pretty clearly saying that that's not going to happen. So we'll wait and see. But I'd be surprised, and it's definitely not been a priority coming into this window. But yeah, we'll wait and see. I think Detroit doing so well has kind of put Sunderland in a position of real strength. Just before we finish, lads, I just wanted to reflect a little bit on, we talked so much about this period of the season that we've just had in terms of a bit of anxiety, a bit of worry about it. And I wanted to see how you kind of guys felt coming at the end of it, because I think at the start, going into this period ahead of the Brighton game, if someone had said, you'd pick up, I think it's 4 Premier League points, go through in the Cup, I'm not saying we'd have all settled for it, because I think you'd have hoped that someone would pick a win up somewhere in the league, but we'd have been all right with this, wouldn't we, James?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm just looking at the fixtures now, but you've kept a clean sheet against Manchester City. You've got a point coming from behind against Tottenham. The Brentford game is disappointing, but even then there's a little bit of an asterisk. If Sunderland had scored that penalty, it could have been potentially a completely different contest altogether. The clean sheet at Brighton as well is no mean feat. Brighton are a really, really good side. Would have liked to have seen us beaten Leeds, but not to be. We didn't lose. We've kept that unbeaten home record intact. Still unbeaten at home heading into the middle of January is just insane, really. I don't think anybody would have predicted that. As I've said, we just keep ticking along nicely. And I've seen enough now, Phil, to know that this group can get a result in the Premier League. They can grind it out defensively. They stick manfully to the task. And I think they've shown great character throughout. I think you need that in the Premier League. So I'm fairly comfortable with the challenge of the rest of the season. We might lose games. I think we will lose games. There might be another sort of Brentford-type scoreline in there. I think that's just the way the Premier League works. But we still actually haven't lost back-to-back games in the Premier League this season either, which is a remarkable achievement. So I think despite being winless in the league in, 4 or 5 now? Or is it even 6 since the Newcastle game? I don't think there's any reason to panic. I think Sunderland defensively are in a really, really good spot. With the AFCON players to come back in as well, I think we're going to be just fine. I'm very, very relaxed. It feels weird actually to be this relaxed in January about a transfer window and the rest of the season, because I absolutely was not last season. You're looking at who you can get. You're thinking, will Sunderland be able to finish in the playoffs or push for the top two? It's very chaotic. You're playing games every week in the Championship, midweek games, and I guess your expectations change from game to game and you're constantly recalibrating. But at the moment, it just feels like it's ticking along very nicely, which probably means there's something horrendous around the corner. But maybe that's me just being hardwired as a Sunderland fan after all these years.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some twists and turns. But yeah, I mean, it has been a struggle at times as we expected, Chase. You know, the second half against Leeds, the first half against Tottenham, that whole thing at Brentford. But I think the thing for me is it doesn't feel like the momentum's gone away because we've picked up enough results. Saturday was a really kind of nice morale boosting day, you know, obviously with the 8,000 fans there and what have you. It has been a bit of a struggle at times, as we knew it would be, but it feels like the momentum's still kind of trending in the right direction at the end of it.
Yeah, and look, I think the biggest compliment you can pay Sunderland over the past, however many weeks has been that, there's been so many points at which you've almost forgotten that they're missing half a team to AFCON, because the players who've come in have done so well. Like you say, there's been enough of a sort of, maintenance of that forward momentum that it hasn't felt as if this is a side massively hamstrung by absences. I think the other key thing to mention is you've got to take every point in context, haven't you? So a draw against Manchester City, you look at the form table and it's another sort of, it's not a win, it's not a green tick, whatever, but felt like one. It was brilliant. It's as good a Sunderland performance as we've seen in a long, long time. They were wonderful that night. Obviously, like James said, against Leeds, you look at it and you go, all right, well, they've taken the lead, they're at home. It's another newly promoted side. You would hope that they'd hang on for the 3 points. But at the same time, Leeds are in a really good place right now. They've turned themselves around, So I think that if you look at the run of games that Sunderland have had, with the caveat that the Brentford game was almost like a dictionary definition of one game too far. I think that Sunderland looked leggy and they struggled throughout that match. Reflection of the schedule, reflection of the players who weren't there, whatever it may be. But with that caveat, I think Sunderland have done really, really well. And again, like James said, every hurdle, isn't it? Every accusation that's thrown at them, or they haven't played anyone, or they're going to struggle through AFCON. They find ways of navigating it. They find ways of managing it. And more power to them. Absolute testament to the work that Régis Le Bris has done this season, the way that the squad have bought into the project, the way that it's come together, and he's been able to sort of make a cohesive unit out of those 14 new signings in such a short order. It's been brilliant. And yeah, you would hope that, they can return to winning ways at home against Crystal Palace team, who obviously had that huge upset against Macclesfield at the weekend, but have also struggled prior to that as well. Sunderland will be looking at that and thinking that's a winnable game. But, going into that, even without a win in however many weeks, I think that they still deserve to be commended hugely.
I think Saturday is actually really interesting now, Phil, because Crystal Palace are without a win, I think, in 9 in all competitions. They're going through an absolutely miserable run. Sunderland unbeaten at home, but looking to bounce back with a win in the Premier League. It's got all the hallmarks of an interesting game. Oliver Glasner being linked with the Manchester United job, and then Crystal Palace's form just absolutely tanking, and then getting knocked out as the FA Cup holders by a semi-professional side. It's been crazy to watch, and the magic of the cup, it's not dead yet.
Yeah, if that classic kind of viewpoint, I haven't followed Sunderland over a long time. It makes me feel pretty pessimistic about Saturday when I hear all these problems that they've got. But yeah, we had a little question pop up there. Who do we fancy in the FA Cup 4th round? And that's quite a nice place to end it, I think. For me, don't care as long as it's at home. To be honest, if it's away, I don't know. Give me a little trip to Mansfield or something like that, somewhere a bit different. But what do you two fancy?
Shall we get the Mags at home just for just for a little bit of revenge?
Twice is enough in one season for me.
No, I would like Macclesfield, but I would actually quite like it away, just to get a little ground ticked off.
Yeah, Cheers. Lower league away, and not a Premier League team. Certainly anyone but Newcastle. I don't want to curse us when I say that, but anyone but the two. But even then, something a bit different, something a bit exciting. A lower league clash away from home, like James says, would be ideal, really, wouldn't it?
Mansfield, a little bit of Nigel Clough. We need a bit of
Mansfield
Nigel
away.
Clough.
Yeah, I'd like a bit of Mansfield away.
And we can turn around the cup horrors of days gone past.
I can tell you now what it's going to be, though.
Go on.
It's going to be Stoke City away.
Oh,
I'm telling you now.
You two can go at that one. I'm staying home.
I'm telling you now. It's Stoke City away. So yeah, let's say hope for Mansfield away. That would be a good one, and we can avenge the 87 times we lost to them in the FA Cup at the Stadium Light in the League One era. Boys, that was an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me. Thanks so much to everyone who has listened, watched, and commented as well. We really appreciate it. It makes it such much more fun to do. And we'll hopefully be back next week with another edition of the Raw podcast, but there'll be absolutely stacks of content on the Sunderland website and on the YouTube channel as well. So keep your eyes and ears out for that. And as ever, thank you so much for your support and thanks so much for joining us.